Hi, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this brand new episode of The Joy of Logistics. And today we're going to continue to talk about the AMH, or in other words, more sustainable approaches towards global logistics. This obviously also contains a lot of ocean freight. And I was thinking, okay, what's something really new, something that a lot of people haven't heard about, because obviously by now I guess everybody has heard about containers, and maxing out the containers capacities and all of that. And I'm sure everybody also heard about ocean freight in general, or let alone using barges or trains. And now you also hear and read a lot about more sustainable fuels, right? I mean, there is obviously hydrogen, very big. There is also all sorts of ammonia, methanol, and LNG, obviously, you name it. And those fuels are also intended to be used either on vessels, on trucks, even on planes, sometimes. And by while I was thinking about what can we do, let me just switch that over here real quick. Who can we bring on and talk about? In fact, I have some technical issues, it seems. Um, I thought, hey, okay, I have a fantastic guest. I have a fantastic contact that actually is a good fit. So Pat Roche, who was on the show the last time, and myself, we reached out to Brad, and he actually he wanted to meet us, and I'm very glad that he does. And not only is he holding multiple degrees, no, but he's also leading the U.S., as far as I know, one and only, and also first carbon neutral industrial park. And I thought, hey, that's probably the best guy to have on and to talk about this whole topic. And I guess everybody is just as myself, very curious to learn more about. So I'm just going to there we go. Brett, there we are. You are live, sir, and I'm very pleasured and very honored to have you on the show today. So yeah, a warm welcome from me, and I guess also from the audience. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Christoph. Very happy to be here. Happy to reach out, across the pond, and talk to people worldwide about what we're doing here and certainly logistics in the United States.
Excellent, excellent. And without further ado, because I guess that's what a lot of people are craving for, would you give us a quick introduction, who you are, and also give us an idea what a carbon neutral industrial park actually is?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm the director of the Great Plains Industrial Park. We are a former Army ammunition Army base. And so we are 14,000 acres. So that's a little bit bigger than your normal industrial park. And we're about 3 times bigger than a normal base. And that was due to, again, storing ammunition here. What we have is a 10-year-old, as of Monday, industrial park, really with all the assets in place, 100 miles of roads, 30 miles of rail. We have under roof about 1.25 million square foot under various buildings that are on site. So we have a very well developed, what you would call mega site, which is now cool to say in the United States, as everybody's looking for a mega site to develop. And so unlike a green field, we're pretty ready to go for developers, manufacturers, et cetera. And with our central U.S. location, along a Class 1 rail line, along some major highways, east-west in southern Kansas, and a north-south kind of location in the U.S. It's a pretty nice place to be logistically.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're literally in the middle of the center, right?
Yeah, you can't get much more central than where we are, so there's nothing bad about that.
That's fantastic. And you were just talking about you're already having all the connection in place, Brett. So would you walk me through that? I mean, do you have a connection with, I don't know, Norfolk Southern or maybe Union Pacific or something like that, where actually um, shippers, logistics people, whoever can actually bring in the cargo directly from a port or from a different place in the US or maybe Canada, instead of transloading back and forth.
Yeah, so we're on a direct southbound line for UP. So everything
Okay.
is going from here, south to say Houston, Mexico, et cetera. So all southbound traffic on the UP system, it's good for us to get that. So anything that's coming from the northern plains, Chicago area, et cetera, it works well coming through our area. We are working to have some connections, improved south of us that will allow us to get some northbound freight as well. We have
Mhm.
had some northbound freight on the southbound line in the past when we were moving wind turbine blades. So that was pretty interesting on how the logistics work there. But so we're able to correct with the ports. We've gotten freight from Port of LA, Port of Houston. So we're hoping to be kind of that linkage in that Midwest freight network as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Man, I mean that sounds pretty thrilling, and yeah, as you already alluded to, based on your geographical position, this obviously makes sense, and it's even better to hear that you are or that the industrial park is already fully connected also on the railroad network. And you just alluded to you already had, for instance, windmill turbines that were passing through. Can you tell us a little bit more, Brad? What's your, in case there is something like that, your, let's say, typical commodities or your core commodities that you're serving, so to speak?
Yeah, so coming through this area, you're going to see a lot of bulk cargo,
Hmm.
steel, fertilizer, lumber, a lot of grain moved out of the central U.S. Aggregate. There's some package freight, but a lot of resin moves in the Midwest as well. Say, for instance, from the Houston, Dallas area north to plastics manufacturers in our area. So a lot of bulk commodities that, as you're seeing ports go to more containerized business, it's a little bit harder to find those places to offload and places to move those commodities.
Hmm. 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 I hear you. Wow, that's actually pretty interesting. Now, since also a lot of my followers are somehow working with containers, I'm sure there will be, or there are some questions maybe. Hey, Brad, that's pretty interesting, but how could that apply to me? I'm moving more and more containerized freight, one sort of another. But I'm maybe just located outside of Kansas City or just around Parsons or Joplin, Missouri, Tulsa, Oklahoma, something around like so, where you're actually perfectly placed. Um, what would you tell those folks? I mean, is that something that you're working on as well?
I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to happen in the U.S. is that no matter how we tend to increase our port capacity, our internal
Hmm.
capacity needs to triple as well. And so it doesn't matter what we do on the coast if we don't do anything in the interior. And so we have had discussions with US DOT, FRA, FMC about using our location not as a temporary yard, but as a permanent
Hmm.
yard. We have
Hmm.
about 190 acres that we could develop into laydown, which would
Hmm.
adequately take a lot of the pressure off a Kansas City, a Chicago, a St. Louis, a Memphis, a Houston, Oklahoma City, a Dallas. all of those could really come and sit at our place, where in many
Mhm.
cases you have a port and freight has to move for them to make money. In our instance, freight can sit at our place, which is kind of a unique situation. So there are, temporary storage yards that have gone up across the U.S. in the last couple of years, but
Mhm.
we're a permanent solution, and we have, a professional partner in Watco that can handle those containers, can handle them in a professional manner, and we have the security to make sure it works for people as well.
Mhm. And I'm sure a lot of the folks in Los Angeles and New York these days will be pretty jealous upon your situation that you can say, hey, listen, we have so many available space where the freight can actually sit, and it's not standing in between the ways and all of that, because as everybody knows, those places are still heavily congested on both empty containers as well as inbound or outbound freight as well, which is yeah, talking from an economic point of view for the American economy, it's a pretty devastating place to be in, actually, right?
Yeah, I think that you're going to see, as far as freight, the Midwest corridor from Houston to Minneapolis just become more and more important. I think the
Hmm.
quicker you can get freight into the interior and then, like a firework, kind of bring it back out to those regional kind of parentheses of maybe Vegas, all the way to probably a Louisville, Kentucky, a
Hmm.
Memphis, a Shreveport. I think that's really an optimum way to disperse your freight. There's, you can work up and down the coast, north, south, and be pretty effective. But trying to get, especially rail freight on the East Coast into the interior, there's a lot of population to go around. So using a Houston, a marine highway as a gateway
Hmm.
into, the interior, and then, a big class one railway from the West Coast to into the Kansas City area. That, I think, is the most optimal way for us to flow freight, and then to
Hmm.
figure out how we can effectively move it within the inland ports as well without providing a whole bunch of congestion.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely, and I'm absolutely with you, Brett. I do think as well that this will mitigate and take off a lot of pressure that various ports are facing right now, right? And in fact, what and that's just my opinion, but there's just so much cargo coming into the US and also going out of the US, and somehow it still has to move, and it doesn't really make a big difference whether or not you shift it from Los Angeles to New York and then from there down to Charleston. If the destination is at any time Chicago or Louisville or Kansas City, it doesn't matter really much which way you're bringing it in or bringing it out, right? Because at the end of the day, you still got the same amount of freight that has to move and not just idle around or be left gathering dust, right?
Absolutely. I mean, everybody knows in the logistics world, it's all about the number of touches, and, making an effective stream from point A to point B, limited touches, limited amount of expensive sitting, as you're talking about, whether it be dwell fees, demurrage, et cetera. All that plays into the customer's bottom line, but also the logistics group's bottom line. So we're trying to provide that ability, that we can give them an option that's feasible, but
Mhm.
also inexpensive.
Mhm. That sounds absolutely fantastic. And as you already alluded to, those additional charges are killing a lot of importers and also exporters, obviously, because it really can get pricey out there if the container is sitting around in either in the port or on a chassis and doesn't get moved out, right? And also an interesting point that you were already touching on, Brad, when you mentioned the American Maritime Highway, because I guess it would be also beneficial. Let's just say someone has a freight from whatever, Massachusetts to Kansas, right? And especially talking about larger volume, so not just a single pallet or two, but maybe a truckload or a couple truckloads. I guess it also makes sense to put that, let's just say, on a container, on a barge in Boston, bring it down all the way to Houston, put it on a rail up to you guys, right? Instead of hauling it on several trucks throughout the whole country.
Well, I mean, that's one way to do it. But the other part is that you can get very close to us by barge, that we're within, 90 miles of Port of Catoosa, which is one of the westernmost endings of the, Missouri-Mississippi River system. And so coming up through Port of New Orleans or through Houston is a way you can get to us by barge. And so I think that that's something that needs to be explored heavily as we look at congestion. What can we put on a barge? Maybe try something new that you haven't put on a barge before, instead of putting it on, hundreds of trucks or on thousands of rail cars. Maybe that's something that we need to explore a little bit better.
That's actually a very good point, and I gotta admit, I didn't know that the Mississippi Missouri River system is actually reaching even down to Oklahoma, but that's even more beneficial to you guys, I guess, right? Because you just take off so much cargo, slash so many, for lack of a better word here, unnecessary trips with trucks, with whatever, because you simply can just put it on a barge, right?
Yeah, when you're talking about sustainability, it's a big change. It's a big deal to be able to take trucks off the road, use less diesel in a locomotive. So when you're talking about a couple tug drivers, or shippers versus, needing a lot of drivers, and what we seem to have is a driver shortage right now. There's a lot of things from the employment side to the sustainability side where it makes a lot of sense.
And just out of curiosity, what do you think are maybe the top three reasons that especially these solutions, or maybe let's just say approaches, haven't been taken on a more broader space, on a more broader audience? If you could share some ideas.
I think you use the resources that you have at hand, and you always want to explore something that's going to be feasible in the near term, right? And so I think that we were blessed with a generous amount of generational drivers, and then we were also kind of blessed with this great railroad system. And so there wasn't really a move or a need to change. And now that urgency has been brought forth with congestion at the ports, rail safety, amounts of drivers. I think those are providing you the instance as to why you would not look at it before, and now you can. And so getting onto, that river system seems to be like a good solution for how we need to move freight forward.
That's actually a great point that you made here, Brett. And just want to touch base real quick on an article that I read just this morning. I gotta say, morning European side to be accurate here. So I think 2 or 3 weeks ago there was this threat, so to speak, from the U.S. Railroad, more or less all unions, threatening to lay down their whole work, which would be a total disaster for the U.S. economy. I think that's needless to say. However, this morning I just read another article where it appears that this topic in terms of striking on the railroad system isn't fully off the table just yet. And I do think that companies that potentially could be affected by such a, how can I put this, tremendous impact on their logistics side, those will be probably watching and craving for your information right now, because they're like, wow, why didn't we think about that earlier, right?
Well, I think that again, you roll with the punches that are provided to you. So now here's a situation, you've got to adjust to the situation. I think logistics people are very adept at doing that. I think you've seen the the lessening or the perceived lessening of freight on the West Coast, but that's been pushed to the East Coast with the changes in shipping to Europe and then breaking down of ships and coming to the East Coast a little bit more. So I think that logistics people are very adept at finding solutions, and I was very surprised at how swiftly the change went from West Coast to East Coast in the United States, because people seem to think the East Coast it wasn't going to happen because of cost, but there seems to have been a way to do that effectively. So I think that most companies will figure out a solution, but I think they're always interested in new solutions, right? That maybe they hadn't pursued before. Again, just because out of necessity. So I think that if we can give them a green solution on the water, I think a lot of people will look at it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's also a great point that you just made, Brett. The Is this a word, adaptability? Can I put it like this? Is that a word? And I think that's probably one of the key learnings that COVID, and now I'm talking from the logistics effects and the logistics point of view on that, that the whole pandemic gave more or less the whole world, because traditional ways, just say from a random port out of China to the US to Europe to wherever, boom, overnight it was just gone. It got impossible. Then you got Ever Given blocking the whole Suez Canal, boom, and industry or a whole economic doesn't just wait until a port is reopened, a ship is being tugged out. Ports or rails are striking or are not striking, right? Because the wheel that we globally are in from an economic point of view, it just keeps rolling. Maybe slow, but it keeps on rolling, and it has to. It has to. And yeah, also given the demographics, the demographic development, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the US, they will, oh, well, that's at least forecasted. They will impact the whole supply chain and everything else on a whole new level. But I'm absolutely with you, Brad. Logistics and the way things are done are constantly evolving, and I also think they have to, because these days we are in the year 2022 and not 1975, 1983, whatever. Things change, and sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better. But at the end of the day, somehow we got to deal with it, right? Because no one wants, if someone intends to go out to a grocery store and wants to buy some apples or pineapples or whatever, and it's just not there, who is going to take this in the current year that we are in?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, in the fact that the interconnected trade wheel doesn't stop. When it stops, we have a crisis, and we found out what happens when we stop it, unintentionally sometimes. And so I think you're just going to find a new spoke in the wheel, right? So if that new spoke is using the marine highway, then that's a spoke that develops. If it's providing more interconnected intermodal in the interior of the United States, as it was back in the 80s, late 90s, there were more intermodal ramps in the US. That's going to come back. How people are choosing to utilize their inventory also changes, how things work. And I think that you're seeing a change away from just-in-time inventory because people were burned by that quite recently. So I think that necessitates more spokes of the logistics wheel, because you're having more warehousing in places where you didn't have it before. So those are things that are changing, and I think you're right. I think it's just going to be people finding alternate solutions to keep that wheel moving.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And just want to take the time real quick, Brad, and want to shout out some people. You're great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for following. Bresman Corrales, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for joining us. I do think Cora is out there somewhere as well. Would be fantastic being here as well and welcoming you. She's been following especially the whole AMH series so far, very, very interested, and always has some interesting questions. And it's great having everybody here in the audience. And Yeah, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us today. Um, yeah, I was just thinking, Brad, do you, well, of course, no one has a crystal ball, but as of your experiences as of today, what challenges on the one hand side, but also maybe what opportunities do you foresee for, yeah, let's say US logistics slash your particular green, or I just call it green industrial park right now. Yeah, what can you walk us through on that? What are you seeing, and also how you may be preparing?
I think the challenge for the U.S. is a real serious look at freight flow. We have to really solve that and solve it from the inland to the coast and back. We can't just do it as one location here, one location there. We can't cherry pick any of that. We have to be very serious about it, just as we were about the interstate highway system. It has to be just as important, and hopefully, someone will take that on from the
Mhm.
political, the political standpoint, saying we need to solve this problem right now. We don't want to go back to what we experienced a couple of years ago because we were caught, not prepared. So I think that's as
Mhm.
important as anything that we're facing. The other thing will be, as we've talked about several times today, sustainability, as greening up those ways of transporting things. We can continue to transport the way we are, but it won't be efficient. It won't be good for the climate. It won't be good for the residents of this earth. So we have some very smart people focusing on that now. So I have some very good hope that we are going to be, a producer of some of these alternative fuels. We can give people opportunities here in the Midwest United States to move things in a green fashion that blockchains effectively for investors, that
Mhm.
gives companies ESG goal attainment, and
Mhm.
that I think is where we're headed as a society. So if we take those three things and we actually put some effort into it, instead of just giving it lip service and kind of kicking it down the road, we can help that next generation, but we can help ourselves at the same time.
And actually, Brett, that's also a very good and a very important point that you were just touching and bringing on, given all the, yeah, sustainability topics. So yeah, once again, I'm pretty happy to having you on here today, because as I said initially, the EMH and this mini series within the Journal Logistics is dedicated to sustainability. And what's actually interesting is one tends to read more and more news also where all of a sudden big companies are looking for ways to turn green. Of course, not overnight, granted, absolutely, but you read that more and more companies are looking into different solutions, different approaches, how to make things better, whether it's on the packaging side, whether it's on the transportation side. And there are many big companies out there and like really large publicly traded companies that are now also taking this whole climate change and the carbon dioxide or sulfur oxide, whatever the heck those emissions are called, that are taking those measures pretty seriously and are committing to a zero emission policy, whether it's by 2030, whether it's by 2040 or 2050. This doesn't necessarily matter too much, but just the approach or the development itself is to me pretty interesting because prior to COVID, no one really bat an eye on that. I mean, logistics back then was more or less, hey, who has the cheapest rates, and how clean or how dirty your fuel, your vessel, your truck, your plane, your you name it is. More or less. I know that's maybe also a bit of a big generalization I'm doing right here, but this was at least what I've perceived as a pretty widespread opinion throughout the whole marketplace, and it's interesting and also very important that this switch, that this change is happening and that is occurring right now.
Yeah, I think what you see is the population, wherever you might be in the world, wants companies to be socially responsible, and
Hmm.
that public pressure is having corporate boardrooms a buzz with how do we attain this goal. We don't want to lose customers. We don't want to lose standing or face with the population because we're not doing our part. And I think that they've taken that seriously. I think you said, some of the recent investments you're seeing really show that. So I expect that to continue.
And that's actually also an interesting development, or let's call it transition phase. I think this is probably a better word here, because as I said, it's not just those big or those big BCOs, those big importers, shippers, but this also trickles then down to, for instance, airlines. I mean, last year we've seen, I believe it was Delta Airways, who flew from Chicago all the way to Washington on 100% sustainability or more sustainable alternate fuel, which is 100% synthetic. You also see on the ocean freight side, you do see a lot of carriers, whether it's Maersk. Maersk is actually pretty busy when it comes down to sourcing new joint ventures, looking for new type of fuels, working a lot of new engine types. And I do understand that there is a lot of trial and error. Obviously, no one has the perfect plan, but and I think that's also something that COVID propelled, in my opinion, is this curiosity and the pioneering of different systems and different attempts to turn logistics, or to turn global logistics more and more on the greener side. And that's actually, in my opinion, a very important and interesting fact, because as I said, prior to COVID, no one really cared about it, right?
Yeah, I agree. And when you look at these fuels, I think you're going to go through several stages. I think we have to be pragmatists. It would be nice to be 100% carbon negative today, but that's just not really a possibility with the technology. It's going to take a little while. I think it's going to get there quicker than what people think, but you're going to have people, like you talked earlier about methanol and ammonia and electro fuels and syn fuels. I think those are going to have a great place. And I think for some companies, that's where they will stop. And they'll say, this is what we can do. And I think that we all have to be acceptable of that as well, is that while we want a practical goal, instead of some fanciful goal that we just can't achieve, because then we're spending a lot of money and time and effort on things that really aren't achievable. So I think you have to have a practical green goal, is really probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also curious to see how hydrogen is supposed to work out in this whole energy or fuel puzzle. I'll just put it like this. I've also read that there are some plans also for, I believe, Kansas or Missouri, where they want to add a rather bigger hydrogen production facility plant, you name it. So there is actually a lot of movement in the market, and I believe logistics has never been more interesting than it is right now. And there is a lot more to come, and I'm actually pretty curious to see how that could map out. But as you already alluded to, Brad, earlier, it's not just about solving these fuel type problems, but also to make sure that you also focus on the whole total inland infrastructure, right? Because needless to say, so many ports are desperately overwhelmed with the amount of cargo that they're facing with. Some of those chassis that are out there right now should have been taken out of traffic, some decades ago, because they're just all rusted and dirty and are just not safe anymore. Plus, which you also already mentioned, the trucker shortage, whether it is there or it is not as heavily as it is described publicly there, this doesn't really matter, because we are seeing similar effects out here in Europe as well. And those are all challenges that have to be faced and that have to be tackled at the end of the day, right? Because there's just so much stacked on it, and so many people and companies are depending on exactly that.
Yeah, I think that, like I said before, you have to take a serious look at everything now. There's not something that you can slough off. You're going to have to
Hmm.
look at more automation. We just don't have, as you guys preceded us in Europe, your birth rates started declining before ours did, and now ours at that. And it's really brought some of these issues to to fruition. So I think that a lot of what's happening here also in logistics is resource apportionment, where whether it's
Hmm.
containers or chassis, they're not in the right place. And so you almost need to take some of a clean sweep approach in some regions and say, okay, we're just going to move all of these to where they should be, and we're going to start over and see how it all matriculates. So I think
Hmm.
that's something
Hmm.
that needs to be looked at as well.
Hmm. That's actually a very good point. I mean, we've seen it also throughout the pandemic. Uh, Empty containers that were piling up sky high in Los Angeles or Long Beach, they were desperately missing in other places of the world, right? Whether it was in Switzerland, Czech Republic, or Malaysia, or Korea. Um, as you just said, the misallocation is is a whole different topic, with their own dynamics, so to speak. Um, a quick question also from my side, Brad here. How do you rate Amazon and its role in logistics? As apparently they still seem to be hungry and they are still venturing out into different areas other than just their online shopping. So what do you think about those guys? How dangerous are they, and what do you think, and where do you think they have to be a force to be reckoned with?
I think what you're seeing with some of the bigger companies is that they're providing logistics to, like Amazon, not only to their own company but to others, and they have created lanes in places where there were not lanes before. They have started methods of transportation that weren't there before. I think that's a good
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
I think they are cash positive enough that they're able to go and try things, and in some cases be unsuccessful, but know what lessons they're going to learn, whereas
Hmm.
smaller companies cannot, right? And so I think you need those companies. You need those bigger companies that can establish lanes, maybe sometimes when they're not feasible from a money standpoint, a revenue positive standpoint, maybe in the first couple of years, but then eventually they get, the flow of goods where it needs to go. So I, I like some of the things they're doing. They're trying. They certainly have waded into the green waters as well, about, can we use a synthetic fuel? Can we use electric trucks? Can we use vans, electric airplanes?
Hmm.
So I like that fact. They're pushing the envelope there, and we'll see, how that leads everything for the rest of the transport business. You saw the same thing, with Ford airplanes when they first came out, and they were able to try things because of their contract with the postal service, way
Hmm.
back when, and so they were kind of the Amazon of their time.
Hmm. Hmm. That's actually a great analogy. I think that's really a good example. And yeah, given the current time that we are in, I mean, so many people are also talking about not anymore the industrial age, but much rather the information age.
Hmm.
What do you think about the whole data topic? I mean, there's just so much data available out there. So many people are craving for data. What is your take on data? Maybe also combined with logistics and sustainability.
I think data will drive a lot of these changes. The ability to know exactly where your package is from Amazon is very nice, but you're going to get to where you'll know where the whole container is here in the
Hmm.
near future. Many companies are putting RFID chips in. They're using satellite tracking. They're taking all EDI and API data and funneling it into one source so that they can even
Hmm.
call and kind of unstick some bottlenecks for their customers. It's a very exciting time, I think, when you think about data and logistics being paired up. And then you said on the backside of it, where does the green part come in, or the sustainability part come in? Well, they're able to figure out what are the most efficient routes, or move something on the most efficient route
Hmm.
while in transit, and figure out how many pounds of CO2 can they be avoiding. on their trip and say, I've got a better, cleaner solution today by using this route. I think it's pretty dynamic on just how flexible and how, successful they're becoming.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you also made a great point here with let's call it connectivity when it comes down to not just the package, but yeah, as you said, whole containers, right? And I think 2 months ago, I read that Hapag-Lloyd is going to upgrade its entire container fleet next year and turning those containers into smart containers, and as always, I think if you have one pioneer and one leader in that direction, uh, others are going to follow. At the end of the day, they have to, and you see more and more shipping lines either buy their own software experts or team up with rather large companies. So I'm absolutely with you. This will be definitely the next yeah, let's call it key point or key area that will improve a lot. We already touched base on another point at the beginning of our conversation as well, Brett. What's your take on the empty containers that are, seem like growing out of nowhere, and just especially the US and Mexico just don't seem to get rid of them, and it's just blocking their supply chains in every direction.
I think there's been some recent changes on sweeper ships that has improved the situation a little bit, but a lot of it was dealt with economics. Is that if you were going to say that you were going to go to the grocery store and I was going to pay you $1 to go one way and $2 to go the other, you'd much rather go the way you're getting $2 than one. And so it makes a lot of sense from an economic standpoint. From a freight flow standpoint, it causes a huge problem because companies have built their transport model based off of an equal situation. And so when those dynamics get thrown off, it causes a lot of problems for that freight wheel we're talking about. We did talk with some ports, and they were having loaded containers sit too long. They were having empty containers sit too long. And so like I said, the temporary solutions don't work out very well. You have to take a serious solution about what can we do long term so we never get into this situation again. The sweeper ships are a one-time solution that bears some weight, but again, everybody is going to be pretty self-centered on economics and make sure that they do what they can for their bottom line. And so if that becomes to where it isn't in a company's interest for their bottom line, they're just not going to be able to do it. So you got to look for a permanent solution rather than, the temporary.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, you've seen, as you already alluded to, with those sweeper vessels, which were, I guess, a good aid, but at the end of the day, if you take a look on the bigger picture, more or less just a drop on the hot stone. I mean, the effects might or maybe not be there for a week or maybe two, depending on the size of the port. But it's just nothing for the long term, as you already alluded to. And throughout the pandemic, we've seen a lot of time where the railroad system was also just completely overwhelmed with the amount of cargo coming in. And I do think that, and now connecting to what you said earlier as well, systems like just in time, just in sequence, they just became obsolete. They're not reliable and workable anymore these days. And back in those days, freight in the container or in the truck, on the railroad, whatever, was considered a storage unit per se, without being necessarily in a physical warehouse. So it was, for lack of a better term, I would call it mobile storage here, or in transit storage. We can also put it like this. What's your take on that? How do you think that this will be shaped or maybe changes for the future from your perspective?
Again, I think you have to develop those sites, these storage and transit sites. We call them SIT here. That makes sense. They can't be extremely expensive, but they've got to be strategic. And so to take something from a port of Houston, land it in Kansas to where it sits for a while before it goes to Indiana or Wisconsin, but doesn't gum up Chicago, right, or Memphis. Those are the secondary and tertiary spots you have to have. Otherwise, you get all of these things backed up at a primary location that can't handle it. And the other thing I think you saw during COVID that you still are seeing some today goes with those allocation of those containers. That there are consumers, there are businesses that want those containers but can't get them out of those primary hubs. And so to continue to use the same containers, you're seeing a situation where the answer became people just bought more containers. Well, then you're going to have more containers in the process that aren't going to be used. So there's going to be more empty sitting around clogging up the primary hubs. And that's this thing I think we've gotten to now, is that there's more containers in the system today than there ever have been. And it was really due to the misallocation, not because there were more that were needed. So the solution was to buy more, but now the volume has caused a problem.
Absolutely, and that's also a very good point that you just made, because that's also things that I've read, especially pretty old and sometimes even pretty damaged containers. Instead of just taking them out or bringing them directly to the scrapyard where they should go, they were just added for another round and maybe another round and another round and another round, because the demand was there, simply due to the misallocation. So same thing, I guess it also drills down to economics, and if the bottom line is there, why don't you just take it? I just want to circle back real quick, also to your green industrial park, Brad. How do you see its development, and how would you like to maybe have it even more accelerated from the point of the day, and maybe even tied in more into the whole logistics network? I'll put it like this.
Well, we spent probably the first 8 years cleaning up the park environmentally, and now it's ready to go. And so a lot of our focus now can be on marketing the park and having the right conversations with the right people. I think there was always a pretty good plan in place about being an energy producer, being a logistics hub, and so now it's finding the right partners. And while accelerating is certainly something we want to experience, we don't want to make some serious missteps. And so we want to make sure that we're working with partners that value us just like we value them. And so it's a nice bilateral relationship, and it's going to be lasting. It's similar to everybody jumping into the PPE market during COVID. That seemed like a really great idea for a lot of people, but in the short term, but in the long term, that was a business they weren't, adept at working in and getting, solid customers, et cetera. And so it was good in the moment, but not so good long term. So for us, again, we've been taking the steps to make sure we develop a foreign trade zone. So we have that here available to people. We made sure that we had the fiber on site. We had good Class 1 rail. We wanted to have the things that people desired in a inland port. So now it's okay. We have the capabilities. We need to go talk to the partners that want to use those capabilities. So whether it's a port, whether it's a freight forwarder, whether it's a rail company, now we're ready. And it wasn't worth going and making those pitches when we weren't ready, because you only have so many shots with those big companies and the ports, for people to take you realistically.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine that, but I have to admit I've never tried to develop, and I've never been in your position, so I guess I still underestimate your efforts in that. But yeah, even better that you're willing to take those steps and that you're putting in the work in there. And Could you, because I guess many of the people listening in the audience might ask themselves, hey, okay, free trade zone, okay, that's actually an interesting topic. What other benefits would there be for either forwarder or maybe some bigger companies that might be interested in putting up a warehouse at your facility? Can you give them some more benefits?
So foreign trade zone is technically not part of the United States. And so from a taxation standpoint, it's a good thing for an importer because they're able to sit a product in a warehouse and until they need it, it is not taxed. Now, there are some other benefits besides that. There are things that if there's scrap involved, if the scrap is removed in the trade zone, it is not taxed as part of the overall shipment. So that's a benefit. Another benefit happens to be that you can do what's called an inverted tariff. And so the best example of that is there might be a certain amount of taxes on all of the elements that go into a cell phone. And then if you make it a finished product, there might be a different taxation on the cell phone itself. So you actually get to choose how you're taxed as an importer, whether you want it on the materials or whether you want just whatever way works better for you. So it's a nice feature as well. The other part that works out pretty well is if you are doing some transporting out of country, is that if you have something come in, it sits in the trade zone, and then it goes out to another country, essentially it hasn't been inside the United States. And so that's kind of an interesting feature of the foreign trade zones. And if you're moving from one foreign trade zone to another, say for instance, one in Dallas to one in Parsons, it's not taxed on that transport either. So you can move it from place to place within the United States among the foreign trade zones and not be taxed till it gets to its destination that's eventually outside.
Wow. So basically just benefits, right?
There are benefits to that, and there are also foreign trade zones that are manufacturing zones as well. And so because we have been approved for a warehousing zone, it's easier for a company to get a manufacturing zone, which Kawasaki in Kansas has done a great job. They import some rods that they put in their engines, and they said that they feel like they save about $19,000 an engine by using the foreign trade zone. So it's a pretty good program.
Wow. I mean, this is a serious number. I mean, wow. It really is. I mean, just circling back real quick, commodity wise, I mean, I remember you already alluded to in the beginning, especially a lot of bulk, a lot of grain, resins, etc., is being moved. Now also the rods that you just mentioned from Kawasaki. What other commodities might be a good fit for you as well? Question maybe even some refrigerated goods.
Yeah, well, one we see around here is we have a lot of bolted tank manufacturers, and so aluminum has carried a 25% tariff in the past, and so to bring it in as aluminum and then make it into a tank wall, we have local companies that export those to Mexico, right, and put up water containers, and so for them to bring it in and make it into a tank wall and get it taxed as a tank wall versus a sheet of aluminum is a lot better economic activity for them. So there are highly tariffed goods that it makes a lot of sense to use these foreign trade zones.
Mm-hmm. And would this be maybe also something again for perishable goods? Are you also planning a maybe dedicated niche facility on that as well? Just talking about, for instance, all sorts of fruits, vegetables, maybe even fish, meat, something like that, if you put it on the storage area in there.
Yeah, we absolutely are looking at cold storage at our location that we think with some of the CO2 we're going to have on hand, we'll have a lot of dry ice production, which will lead to some good storage opportunities here. You also saw some interesting import-export kind of tariff goods between the United States and Europe in the past. And so there were some of those that, because of one reason or another, they were taxed. And so to bring in those goods and ship them in the U.S. in a foreign trade zone. And sometimes there have been cases where the tariffs have fallen off while the goods are still sitting in the zone. And so that's another aspect that people sometimes forget about, is quotas or tariffs actually ending. And that's a way to save some money as well, is that if you bring in a certain amount, it's not necessarily subject to quota until it leaves the zone. So if you know where the quota is on that product, it can sit in the zone, and then hey, I can move it out because the quota hasn't been met yet, or you can be the first to market with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's actually a very good point, and I guess a lot of importers, especially traders, will or can relate to what you just alluded to. Maybe one question I haven't, or I still have on hand, Brad. Can you give us a quick idea why you call your industrial park first carbon neutral?
So one of the ideas we had was to again give people something that isn't around yet, and so we saw there was certainly a demand for sustainability, and we went out and purchased a 5-year contract for carbon offsets to offset our activity here at the park, and so we're committed to do that for 5 years. But in that time, we wanted to transition to hydrogen, solar, and wind as kind of the basis for our entire park as we go forward. So we didn't want to just do it to say that, hey, we can put it in name. We wanted to do it in action as well. So while there may be others that are pretty close as well, I know there's 2 others in the world that have this label, but we're the first in North America. So we wanted to certainly, again, we care about the environment. That's the first reason we do it. But the second was we knew people were very interested in their blockchain, and that they wanted to green up every single segment of that blockchain and meet their ESG goals. And we give them that opportunity if they utilize us as a location, because they're able to either say that their product originates or transports from or is stored in a carbon neutral location.
Wow. So you come full circle, and you're not just talking the talk, but you're also walking the walk with your concept, which is fantastic, by the way. I mean, that's really nice to see, to come full circle. Plus, I guess it's another benefit for companies thinking about going green, or at least taking their logistics and their supply chain as far as they can to a greener, to the next greener level. Better to put it like this. Yeah, Brad, it has been a fantastic conversations with you. Just a quick question before we close off here. If someone just listening said, man, wow, really interesting, the foreign trade zone, and also, with the hydrogen, I love this concept of the green carbon neutral industrial park. Brad, fantastic guy. How can they find you, and how can they get in contact with you, Brad?
Well, you can get in contact with me on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn page for our industrial park. Not only that, but the Kansas Proving Grounds, which is the 6,800 acres that we own. Also, our new website went live 5 minutes before this podcast. So Great Plains Industrial Park is where they can find a lot of information now as well. And like I said, I'd be happy to talk to people on LinkedIn and message and go back and forth. It's my job to really go out there and sell the park.
Excellent. With that being said, Brad, want to thank you again for your time, for being on the show today, for some very interesting conversation and content that you put out there. And I hope one or another listening to this will be reaching out to you. And looking forward seeing how Great Plains is going to drive and grow furthermore. And with that being said, wishing you an awesome day, and also to the audience, thank you so much for your time and for attending the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Glad to hear that. My pleasure, Brad.